on R&D, research and development, more than like 2%. So a lot of things we can use that money if we could have done this right. So like you mentioned
Absolutely.
while giving this answer, you mentioned that North India basically is more air polluted. you, can you tell me about, like, you mentioned in your book also there was this meteorological misfortune which happened with especially North India. Can you
Yes,
explain in like what is it?
absolutely. Absolutely. So now, a lot of many people ask this question that, look, why does Delhi have more air pollution? Even Chennai has the same number of cars. Mumbai has the same number of cars. Okay. When it comes to industries, again, Chennai has more industries around it than Delhi has the industries around it.
Yeah.
So why is Delhi so different? The answer is not that Delhi is different. It's the whole North Indian region. It's not a city-based problem. A lot of people think that air pollution means it's a city-based issue. No, in fact, 70% of all the deaths that happen, that I was talking about, this 1.2
Yeah.
million people who die every year, 70% of them are dying in rural areas, not in cities.
Yeah.
Right? So it's equally a rural problem, but people think it's an urban problem. So it's actually a North Indian problem. Now, why is it a North Indian problem? Why is it not a pan India problem? Because after all, we are using the same technologies, same cars, same industries everywhere in the country. The reason for that is the geographical and meteorological realities of this region. So what happens is, especially in the winter time, uh, the there are two or three changes that occur. Because of those changes, there's higher pollution in those regions. So the first is that the wind direction changes. So wind direction changes and it starts pushing all the air towards the north. Okay. Second change that happens is wind speed slows down. So usually in the year, if it is say 10 or 15 kilometers per hour, it comes down to 2 or 3 kilometers per hour, like very, very slow wind speeds. Which means that if there is any air pollution in it, like any car is emitting or agriculture fire or something else, all of that will go into the air and it will get trapped. There is not enough wind to carry it away. Okay, so that's the second change that happens. Then there are some other changes that happen to pressure conditions. And then, of course, most importantly, in the winter time, the temperature drops. So what happens when temperature drops? Uh, as it becomes cold, some of this particulate matter does not get enough energy and it comes down. In terms of its altitude, it starts coming towards the earth. So due to all these changes, all the air gets stuck in one place, and there is no place for it to escape, because on the north and all around the north there's the Himalayan mountain range. So due to the mountain range across this entire region, the entire northern half air is not able to escape, and from the south the air is pushing the air up, so there is no
Yeah.
way for the air to escape. And then to make matters worse, it is at this time that in Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, many other places, you have agriculture fires. A lot of
Stubble burning.
agriculture residue, stubble burning, that is said. And all of this pollution therefore gets stuck. And this is why in the book I called it the meteorological misfortune.
Yeah.
The idea is very simple. This is not something that's unique to India. It happens in many other places. The same exact same problem exists in Los Angeles also. So Los Angeles is also in a valley, and there are mountains on three sides, and wind comes, and any pollution within it gets stuck in that valley. It's the same phenomena in North India, except that in Los Angeles it's just for one city, whereas in India it is the whole North India that is
North
under
India.
it.
Yeah. Okay. So the temperature inversion which you just explained, and there's a
Yeah.
transcontinental arc which you mentioned in your book, where you said
Yes.
there are range of countries which fall into that arc, and due to that they are also the one which are heavily air polluted. So can you tell me about
Absolutely.
uh, you mentioned in your book very effectively that there are area sources, there are point sources, and then there's line sources.
Hmm.
So can you explain me in context of North India, how does air pollution comes like from area source, point source, and line source, if you can?
So, okay. So, I mean, I don't want to get too technical about this. Let me just talk about the general sources of air pollution, and from that, the listener will be able to understand, what the problem is. So, like I said, one of the main, problems is that this is not just an India specific issue. Like you mentioned, the transcontinental arc, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, in fact, if you look at the world map, you will see that from Africa all the way to the Middle East, then Asia, and then East Asia. So we're talking about China and so on. All of this entire region has poorer air quality. The reason it has poorer air quality is because there is obviously there's I mean there is uh, poorer technologies being used. You know, in a country like say Germany or Norway or whatever, they're able to use cleaner technologies, which does not lead to much air pollution. But apart from that, there are also geographical and meteorological reasons, like we discussed, which lead to poorer air quality in this area in general. Now, coming to North India specifically, so what are the sources of air pollution? So some sources are fixed into one place. Okay, so some you could say that about 60% of air pollution in any one region comes from that region itself, of which a lot of it is fixed. For example, like I said, the industries. So you have a lot of brick kilns, you have a lot of other manufacturing units around Delhi, which are fixed sources. Then there are vehicular sources which come and go, but they most of them are local. So in Delhi, you could say 60 or 70% of vehicular air pollution is local. It comes from the cars that exist within the city itself, or cars or bikes or trucks or buses. Then there are 10 or 20% of the trucks, especially, that come from outside. So there's a flow. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. And this can vary according to the time of the day or the week of the month or whatever, because it depends on trade and many other things. Then there's air pollution that comes from outside the city. This is due to at least two or three reasons. One is that there's the Thar Desert is on the west of Delhi or west of northern India in general. So a lot of the dust related air pollution comes from there. So this is a source of air pollution that could be hundreds of kilometers away, but because of the winds, it is able to come through that. And then, of course, there's agriculture fires and so on, which, I know that you were in Delhi for a while, but to other listeners of this program who are based in Delhi, they will realize that every year in the winter time, you can actually smell uh, like leaves are burning. It smells like there is
Yeah.
somebody's burning a bonfire. It's actually not coming from there. It's coming from hundreds of kilometers away in Punjab and Haryana, literally several hundreds of kilometers away. So that is the scope of this problem, and therefore, I think to address it, you need to address the problem according to these different types of sources.
Yeah.
The fixed sources have different strategies. The sources that are outside and the ones that move around all have different kinds of solutions, and we are not able to address this problem given this complexity. Everyone thinks that it's you can, like, in the time of this lockdown, in a lot of people were tweeting and writing on Facebook, look, the lockdown happened and suddenly the air is clean. But it's clean because everything was stopped. That's not
Yeah.
how you deal with the problem.
Yeah.
You People still need to earn money, people still need to go to office, people still need to go to factories. How can you solve the problem without disrupting the economy? That is a real question, given the complexity of these kinds of sources.
Yeah. So, like just you mentioned, it's such a grave issue. So are you following the work of governments, which they are doing? And for example, the present government, how, because I was reading back maybe a year or 2 year back, I was reading about their renewable energy,
Yeah.
how they were able to, they have a target and how they are trying to
Yes.
overachieve it, I guess.
Yes.
So are you able to follow the government right now? Like, are they doing
Absolutely.
something? Are they doing something to solve this issue?
Yes. Yes. In fact, let me give you a statistic which is very interesting. So, a study that was done by the International Energy Agency just 1 or 2 days ago. It was released, I think, on Friday. It showed that between the year 2000 and 2018, right, just 18 or 20-year period, in India, we were able to reduce or rather avoid SO2 and NOx air pollutants by as much as 15%. That is, if we did not have these measures in place, our air pollution would have been 15% more. Okay, so this 15% reduction from the possible, higher air pollution is also a success in many ways. So how did this success come? So this actually came from energy efficiency. So the question is, what is energy efficiency? It is basically any technologies or policies that lead to lesser energy being consumed. As I'll give you one or two examples. For example, in India, back in the day, we used to have incandescent light bulbs.
Yeah.
Right now we have LED light bulbs. Now LED light bulbs consume only 1/10 of the energy of the older generation filament light bulbs. Right? What is the impact of it? Because what is one bulb does not mean anything. But if the whole country has bought different bulbs, we have actually, by getting this kind of lighting technology, LED light bulbs, we have able to stop the demand of the equivalent of 10 coal-fired power plants. Imagine in a country like India, if there were 10 more coal-fired power plants, you can imagine the impact that would have had on the local
Definitely.
communities. So bulbs alone have been able to stop 10 coal-fired power plants in India. Similarly, energy efficiency has happened in the field of industries. So in industries like steel or
Cement.
textiles and so many petrochemicals, they have able to reduce the energy of up to 10 or 15% over the last many years. That is, because of 10 or 15% less energy being used, therefore there's less air pollution automatically. You're burning less coal, you're burning less diesel and all
Yeah.
of that. So these are the kind of improvements that have happened in energy efficiency, which has led to 15% reduction from the, rather 15% avoidance of future emissions. That is one. Number two is the example that you were giving, which is renewable energy. So in India, in the year 2015, there was only 2 gigawatts of
Solar
solar
energy.
capacity.
Yeah.
Yes, that too has increased uh, to about, I think, 35 or 40 right now, and the goal is to make it 100 in the next 2 3 years. And then the larger goal for not just solar, but solar and wind and all like these non-fossil fuel sources, it is 450 gigawatts by the year 2030, which is a huge number.
Yeah.
It's huge because it's more than the total capacity today of even coal. This has been one success because you can imagine, if we did not have solar, if we went from 2 to say 30, if it was not for solar, then this 2 to 30 would have come from coal.
Yeah.
Like, and 30 gigawatts of extra coal, you can imagine the impact of that would have had on our cities, on our rural areas. But that is what this has basically done, is it has stopped future air pollution from happening. So this is a success. What we have failed at doing is to stop existing sources of air pollution. So we may have avoided air pollution in the future by going through energy efficiency or solar and wind and so on, but we have not been able to stop existing coal fired power plants. We have not been able to stop existing industries. We have not been able to stop existing or polluting vehicles. That is where our failure has been.
So with the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the places which you just said, from vehicular, from industrial sector and all, you mentioned in your book that these power sources, for example, hydroelectricity, hydrothermal, solar, all this also generate global greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
So can you explain, like, in different
Yeah.
different sectors, when you take, for example, solar energy, wind energy, hydro energy, how they also emit greenhouse gas emissions while
Yes. So absolutely. So, first let's, for the sake of your viewers or listeners of this program, let me quickly say what's the difference between air pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's easier to imagine what the problem
Definitely,
is.
sir.
Yeah. So firstly, air pollutants is the presence of anything in the air that is harmful to us or harmful to the environment. Okay. So for example, this includes, like we discussed, the gases SOx, NO2 and so on. It also NOx and SO2, sorry. And we also discussed carbon monoxide. We discussed particulate matter, right? Particulate matter could be dust, could be so many other things. Greenhouse gas emissions, on the other hand, are those gases that trap the incoming radiation from the sun and make the atmosphere warmer. So most of the times, air pollutants are also greenhouse gases. So most of the time they are one and the same, but many times they are different. So for example, uh, particulate matter is primarily an air pollutant, but it may not be a greenhouse gas. Similarly, water vapor you can breathe in, there is no problem. Water vapor is everywhere. But water vapor is actually a greenhouse gas also. Right? So there are two-way relationships. So, you can imagine a Venn diagram. In a Venn diagram,
Yeah.
there's air pollutants and then there's greenhouse gases. But somewhere in the middle, on the intersection, is both
The
greenhouse gases and air pollutants at the
April.
same time. So we are trying to minimize on air pollutants, but sometimes it can lead to higher greenhouse gases. And similarly, you can try to minimize greenhouse gases. Sometimes it can lead to more air pollutants. So you have to find best policies that will reduce both air pollutants and greenhouse gases at the same time. So now you mentioned, where, uh, how can it come from hydropower, for example, right? So what happens is that one of the most potent greenhouse gases is actually methane. Methane is nothing but natural gas, which, if in a CNG car you put methane, or in a, if you have a piped natural gas connection at home, the pipe gas, that pipe gas is nothing but methane, right? So what happens is that in hydropower dams, when you take entire regions and construct a dam, and then the water starts flooding on top, right? So entire regions go underwater because their dam has been constructed. So a lot of these trees and grass and shrubs that used to previously exist are now underwater.
Yeah.
So over time, they will start getting decomposed. And as they get decomposed, they release methane because of the natural processes.
Yeah.
That accumulates and that can also become a greenhouse gas. But overall, we usually consider that, this hydropower is good for the environment, at least in terms of air pollution, because there is no air pollution when you run it, but it has greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change.
Yeah.
So, and similarly, in the case of, solar or wind, you will see that even solar panels have to be manufactured. Similarly, wind has to be manufactured. The manufacturing process itself leads to air pollution. But having said that, you have to consider the whole life cycle emissions of any one thing. So, the life cycle emissions of coal will be not just the construction of the coal-fired power plant, but also the use of coal over time.
Over time.
Whereas for wind and solar, it is during the construction of that emissions and air pollution will take place. But after it is constructed, then there is no more air pollution for the life of the for this type of infrastructure and technology.
Yeah. So as you have been like involved in this field, you might be reading a lot of studies, books, articles. So I just wanted to know, can you tell me about from 1947, the growth of solar energy, wind energy, nuclear energy, coal energy. So how did coal energy became the mainstream? Yeah, it had to become the mainstream because it was easy at that time and we had it in abundance. But can you explain me like how the graph is working? Where are we right now?
That's an excellent question. So I will, focus on electricity generation only, because energy as a whole is huge. Energy includes road transport, includes cooking. So first, let's talk about electricity. Okay, electricity is still, I would say, about a good 60-70% of the entire energy, supply. So we can focus on that. So where is electricity being generated from? So if you look at a country like Sri Lanka, in Sri Lanka, most of the electricity is produced by hydropower, right? So hydropower is a clean source of energy. So Sri Lanka has low air pollution. One of the reasons is this. In Pakistan, natural gas has a bigger share of electricity generation. Okay, why do they have that? Because they have sources of natural gas and they have pipelines that come from other countries, so they're able to get cheap natural gas that they can use. In a country like India, right from the time of the independence, we've had focus on only two forms of energy. One is coal and one is hydropower, because both of them were cheaply available. In fact, coal, India has one of the world's largest reserves of coal. We have so much coal that for the next hundreds of years, we will not need to import if we actually, were able to do some proper mining in the country. Therefore, India went for coal. Many other countries that did not have coal went for whatever was available. Because India went for coal, we have now kind of got stuck with this. It's almost like, if you have too much of something, then you kind of become addicted to it.
Yeah.
So India has become addicted to coal because we had so much of it and because we needed energy. India was country that did not have a lot of electricity. Most homes were not connected at the time of the independence. So that is how India's energy journey started. It started with coal and a little bit of hydropower. You would say it's 75-25. 75% of it's coal, 25% of is hydropower. Then over time, when the nuclear revolution happened in the US and in the Western countries, then they started trying to bring nuclear power into India to become the next big thing in terms of electricity generation. Unfortunately, nuclear did not have that big expansion in India because it's a very expensive technology. Number one. Number two, there are some security issues, safety issues, due to which people are naturally very concerned. Thirdly, in general, it's a complex technology which requires international agreements and so many other things. Like in the case of say solar, you can just import a solar panel and be done with it. But in the case
Yeah.
of nuclear, you need many treaties and understanding, a lot of money, all of those things. So therefore, in the starting the 70s, when nuclear started to come to India, we were not able to really tap into it. And even so far in the year 2020, it is just a very small. It has less than a 2% generation in the whole country. Then wind started. Our first foray into wind was actually in the late 1970s, but at that time it was very marginal. It's a very small thing. It actually became quite big only in the 2000s, 1990s and 2000s. So in the year 2000 and by the year 2005, India was already among the top 5 countries in the world in terms of wind power generation. Solar, on the other hand, was always very expensive through history. Although India was doing solar research even the 60s and 70s, it was way too expensive. It was, per unit of electricity was as high as 30 rupees per unit, 20 rupees per unit. Today, it has come down to 2 rupees per unit, from 30 to 2. How did this happen? This happened due to a lot of initiative that the Indian government took, but also mostly due to what happened in China. So China was able to massively expand production of solar cells, and they were able to deploy so much that the prices fell very sharply. So thanks to that, India was able to import cheap solar cells. But once it came to India, the government did a few things. Like the government started something called solar parks. Due to solar parks, you were able to have solar cells that were that any developer could just import, and then the land was already available. All you had to do is just put the infrastructure and connect it to the grid. That's it. Because back in the day, like if you wanted to set up a coal-fired power plant or something else, you will need so many permissions, and you will need so to do so much to acquire the land. Land
Yeah,
acquisition in India is such a big problem.
it's a very big problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Which in the case of solar, that was no longer an issue because of solar parks. So these were the kind of things that happened that made solar cheap. And therefore now in the year 2020, we see that in terms of installed capacity, close to 40% of it does not come from fossil fuels. About 40% of it comes from solar, wind, nuclear, hydropower, things like that.
So, so, so I think like what I think about nuclear energy, if we just talk about nuclear energy, that it has been kind of demonized a lot by a lot of media outlets, a lot of international organizations, just because they don't want to hand over the nuclear, I guess, thing to a country like India, so that they don't expand and make most out of it. So can you tell me about like how effective a nuclear energy would be if everything would have been taken care of, like if treaty would have been done, easier land acquisition, and the mindset of people would be taken care of, that it's not that harmful, and there not have been, because all the accidents which have happened in the past, they were due to a lot of negligence in the case of Chernobyl. So do you think how effective nuclear energy can be? Because I think nuclear energy can be the biggest in terms of.
So you're right. So let me just jump onto this immediately. I think that nuclear power has had a lot of issues around safety and security that people are concerned about. The issue is not that nuclear power is safe or unsafe. That's a obvious question. The real question is, how safe or unsafe is nuclear compared to anything else that we have? Because at the end of the day, you are not it's not a question of whether we have nuclear energy or not. It is whether nuclear should be part of the grid or not. So the a lot of people cite the examples of what happened in Chernobyl or what happened in Fukushima in Japan, what happened in many of these other accidents that have taken place. But in history, there have been major nuclear accidents only in 4 or 5 occasions, right? All the other nuclear accidents or incidents were very small and they were very local and contained. No major fallout outside of the nuclear plant. The major issues that have happened have been, like I said, Chernobyl, and then mostly the most recent accident was Fukushima.
Fukushima.
Do you know how many people died in Fukushima? Fukushima, the accident that happened in Japan because of the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown, that incident led to the stoppage of nuclear power plant construction in many countries of the world. Even Germany, many other countries announced that they will not go for nuclear after that accident. How many people died in that accident? Zero. At the time of when Fukushima actually happened, zero people died. Even now, after all these years, due to nuclear radiation and so on, there have been only 1 or 2 deaths at Fukushima since it happened. Similarly, in the case of Chernobyl and other places, nobody's claiming it's safe, but when the accidents happened, people died, and they were in the dozens. Fast forward today in the year 2020, every year in India, due to coal, 80,000 people die. 80,000. If there was a nuclear accident in India and it killed even 10 people, I'm pretty certain the whole nuclear power program in India would be shut down. By the way, in India's history, due to there have never been a major nuclear accident, and we have not really had to deal with that. But like I said, 80,000 people die from coal every year in India alone. And similarly, due to coal mining, there are even more deaths due to various other aspects of the coal chain, including accidents. In fact, as many studies show, the most unsafe forms of energy in terms of human fatality and mortality is actually hydropower and coal, and in fact also oil. So these are the most dangerous forms of energy. Nuclear is actually the safest, except that because when nuclear accident takes place, it's an explosion, and people, it's more spectacular. So
Yeah.
it is closer in the memories of people, and that is understandable. One thing to remember is that all the coal accidents that have ever taken place in history have all happened on the first generation, first and second generation nuclear reactors. These are old generations of nuclear reactors that did not have many of the safety features that the latest generations of reactors have. In fact, the latest generation of reactors have been functioning successfully in countries like France, Germany, many other parts of the world without accident. In its entire history, we have not seen accidents from the latest generation of nuclear reactors. So which all basically goes on to show that nuclear can be a safe form of energy. In fact, it is far safer than what we actually end up using every year. So if you're actually concerned about the safety of nuclear of energy in general, then you should be most concerned about coal, you should be most concerned about hydropower even more than nuclear.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was also reading about how if there's a nuclear power reactor, and if we talk about the square kilometer of it, how much it gives out the energy compared to the solar energy. It takes huge chunk of land and then gives out
Yeah.
energy which is not even close to nuclear energy. And in the process of in the process of energy generation from solar energy, coal, we kind of loses also energy because
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So basically, we're talking about the land intensity of energies, right? So nuclear has the lowest land intensity. For the smallest piece of land, you can actually generate the most amount of electricity or energy in general, and you can always choose locations where there are low population, just to kind of not because it's dangerous, but because it needs so that people feel safe in
yeah.
general. And so that's the thing about. On the other hand, solar is the most land intense, just because you need solar to be everywhere. But then, solar does not really, once you install the solar, there are no accidents to be had. In solar also there are people dying. I mean, people assume that people don't die because of, in fact, due to solar energy, it's made from silicon and many of these other materials that actually come from the mines in Congo, in many, like many other African countries and so on. Very poor standards, and accidents happen. Mining accidents happen all the time, so people end up dying, very regularly, even in the case of the production of solar power plants, or of uh, wind and so on. But nonetheless,